Hello and welcome to Mekelle Foresight, and this is Mekelle, producer and host of the show. Tonight we are joined by Samuel Gebru from the US via Skype. Samuel Gebru, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mekelle.
Let's start with US President Trump's remarks regarding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam recently, to which you reacted. Tell me about that.
Well, as you know, President Trump a few days ago held a press conference in the Oval Office in the White House, and he had phoned in the prime ministers of Israel and Sudan. This was in regards to the agreement that he was able to work on with those two countries. And in the course of his press conference and phone conversation with those foreign leaders, he remarked about Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, in particular that the government of Egypt was extremely upset with Ethiopia over the dam. And then he mused quite cavalierly, if you will, that Egypt may have to bomb Ethiopia's dam as a response to Ethiopia's perceived aggression towards Egypt on the Nile River. So this obviously angered a lot of people. It angered the Ethiopian American community. It angered Africa, a lot of African countries, and obviously Ethiopia's government itself was quite upset with what happened. And a lot of Americans that are involved with African affairs were equally upset by this as well. So, and I will say this is a pattern on the part of President Trump to say quite inflammatory things in a very cavalier way about all sorts of sensitive issues domestically and internationally.
So does that reflect U.S. foreign policy, or it is Trump's personal view?
Well, part of the issue has been that under Trump's presidency, sometimes it has been hard to distinguish U.S. foreign policy from him as an individual because he governs through Twitter. And we know this, whether it's on domestic or international issues, President Trump has a tendency to tweet off-the-cuff comments, which often take his own staff and the U.S. government by surprise. And his staff are often scrambling for the rest of the day, trying to figure out how to follow up or how to correct what he has said. So when it comes to U.S.-Ethiopia relations, the U.S. and Ethiopia have a very strong relationship. We are approaching 120 years now. It is a vibrant partnership, and obviously it is aided by a vibrant Ethiopian American community that is in all facets of American life, including in government. And for the President of the United States to treat a strategic ally in the African continent in such a way and to make such a remark, musing about the possibility of an Egyptian attack on a very important, not only economic interest for Ethiopia, but also a strategic national security interest for the country, was really inappropriate. So I wish to choose that this is not, or rather I choose to hope that this is not U.S. policy. What we know is that the Treasury Department, not the State Department, has taken the lead on negotiations with Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan over the Nile River, which is highly unusual given the sensitive security and diplomatic nature of this project. And we know that State Department African officials are extremely well on the continent, including the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Tibor Nagy, who is the former United States ambassador to Ethiopia. These folks have been largely sidelined because President Trump has taken a personal interest in this project. So I think that this is really a matter of him and his interests and his undiplomatic manner as opposed to official U.S. policy. But the major concern, obviously, over the last several weeks was the White House's announcement that it was halting some aid to Ethiopia, roughly 130 million US dollars. The exact amount, the exact sources of this are still to be determined, but this has also angered members of the United States Congress, many of whom have very great relationships with Ethiopia, and many of whom represent Ethiopian American constituencies. So they were extremely unhappy to hear of this news as well. So we do know that Trump is trying to impact U.S.-Ethiopia policy through very important foreign policy tools like foreign aid, but it's yet to be seen how successful he will be.
So you are truly worried and angry about his remarks, but you are also not happy the way the Ethiopian government handled the issue in general. Do you think it was proper to take the negotiations regarding the Grand Ethiopian Dam to Washington in the first place?
African issues need to be solved by Africans themselves. I was not happy that the Nile River talks moved to Washington. I saw that as a slight to the institutions that Africans have built. The African Union, IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which is the Horn of Africa regional bloc. These are incredibly important institutions that have mandates for peace, security, and conflict resolution. And for them not to have been active leaders, particularly over the last 2 years, was extremely concerning to me. When you look at over the last decade of negotiations over the Nile River, it really started with a lot of, or rather all of the Nile River riparian countries. There's about a dozen of them. And they all came together to discuss ways to use the Nile's waters in a fair and equitable manner, understanding that obviously Egypt is extremely reliant on the Nile River, and that's a fact no one can deny. But also understanding the Ethiopian position that the Ethiopian position to use the dam for hydroelectric purposes, not for irrigation, and allowing water to flow to Egypt as well. So there has been, obviously, as you know, throughout the years, various technical committees. The water ministers of these countries have convened regularly to discuss sort of more scientific and specific matters. And obviously in diplomacy, it's great when people are talking and when they're negotiating, as opposed to outright war. So my hope was that, and it still remains, obviously, that African-led peace talks can resume. The African Union is stepping in again and having a virtual video conference with the leaders of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. That's awesome. I think that we need more of that. We should not see the West as a solution, or anyone else for that matter. And I think the most important role that the United States can play, and the role that we as Ethiopian Americans, as U.S. taxpayers, can play is the importance of supporting African-led peace talks and encouraging those three countries to continue to talk to each other, to continue to build economic, cultural, academic partnerships, scientific partnerships that are going to be for the benefit of everybody. The Nile River has always been the lifeline to Egypt, but Ethiopia truly does have a strong case and a right to utilize its waters, obviously. And it's important that this is done in a very delicate way. As you know, the Horn of Africa in particular has seen its fair share of crises and conflict over the last century. And it's important that the leaders of these countries do whatever they can to diffuse tensions. So for the United States president to insert himself to demand that these talks are held in Washington, and really to see it as part of his larger obsession with making deals. The president has a personal obsession with seeing himself as a winner, and obviously impacted the talks between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan. So my hope is that the African Union-led peace talks will be fruitful, and that there will be some sort of mutually agreeable path forward for all the now riparian countries.
The way Trump was, talking in that press conference, it sounded like that the issue of the dam is a done deal, and that Ethiopia had agreed and that it cannot backtrack. And many have suspected those people in power now in Addis of selling out this strategic interest of Ethiopia to Egypt. And here Trump comes and divulges this information. Does that confirm this suspicion among Ethiopians that Ethiopia's interests on the GERD has been compromised, for financial ends?
As you know, the Ethiopian position on the Nile River since the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie has always been consistent. And I admire that about Ethiopia, that it has had aspirations over the last several decades to utilize the Nile River's waters. I think that the Ethiopian people definitely have a well-founded fear and a concern of foreign intervention that has been an issue for Ethiopia for centuries. And certainly when it comes to the Nile River, because this is not only an economic asset but a strategic national interest asset, what we have seen is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a unifier for all Ethiopians. It is a unifier for those at home and those of us abroad. It's a rallying cry because it symbolizes not just perhaps the most important infrastructure undertaking in modern Ethiopian history, but also it is, as the name of the dam itself suggests, a hope, a mandate for change and an awakening, or a reawakening rather, of Ethiopia. And so there definitely are valid concerns that many share, including me, that Ethiopia, especially in the last 2 years, had more of an incoherent strategy on the certain overtures to the government of Egypt and other countries really have raised concerns. And again, Ethiopia agreeing to U.S.-led peace talks, I think, was definitely a red flag, precisely because we know that whatever Donald Trump touches ends up in destruction. The United States, before Trump and hopefully after Trump, is going to continue to be a strong partner to Ethiopia and to the African continent. My hope is that under hopefully a Biden administration, we will see a more coherent U.S. Foreign policy on Ethiopia and a more predictable approach to conflict resolution throughout the world. We don't have that right now. Given the realities in the United States, I would have hoped that the Ethiopian government would have signaled its concerns and its objections a year and a half ago, instead of letting talks resume. As you saw, obviously, the foreign ministers of these countries were convened by Trump in the White House, and there's a very famous photo of all of them sitting around the resolute desk of the United States president. And so I really do share a lot of these concerns that Ethiopia should not have agreed to these talks, not because the United States as a country is not to be trusted, but because the Trump administration in particular has been quite reckless with foreign policy, and Ethiopia consenting to such sensitive talks to be led by an unpredictable government, really it opens a can of worms, as we've seen. Again, the United States president musing publicly that Egypt would bomb Ethiopia's Renaissance Dam, it's just unacceptable.
An Ethiopian church in the U.S. even said that this is tantamount to a declaration of war. What do you have to say to this?
What concerns me more than President Trump's remarks are his actions to withhold parts of Ethiopia's aid package. The United States gives Ethiopia roughly around $800+ million a year in foreign assistance. Most of it, over $500 million of it, is for critical humanitarian assistance programs, anything ranging from food security to refugee assistance to HIV/AIDS and whatnot. That is really important. Playing with those dollars, politicizing and weaponizing those dollars harms the Ethiopian people at the end of the day. And then the rest of it obviously goes to a variety of other means. And so what we're possibly looking at is a withholding of certain aid that would look more around the lines of security measures, including anti-human trafficking assistance programs and troop training programs and whatnot. And so I think that's obviously of concern as well. But that because it's actual dollars involved as opposed to President Trump's off-the-cuff remarks, that does actually concern me more. And the fact that that decision was made without consulting the normal channels, right? The United States Congress, which appropriates money, was not consulted in advance of that decision. And it has angered a lot of members of the United States Congress, especially those who are most familiar with Africa and Ethiopia, that the president would be so hostile towards a very core ally for the United States. Not to mention, doing this, President Trump's remarks and President Trump's decision to withhold financial assistance to Ethiopia only opens the door for China to be more involved in Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa, and the entire continent. And so if the United States is truly genuine about regaining its influence in the continent, being hostile to a very long-standing ally is not the way to do it.
China is a strong partner to Africa, including Ethiopia, and its hands-off approach regarding partnership in development is viewed positively among Africans.
I think the U.S. has a variety of interests, obviously, on the African continent that are similar to and also different from China. Obviously, both countries see Africa as a place to do business, as a place for resources, as a place for all sorts of partnerships, whether it's medical, scientific, academic, cultural, etc. But I think one of the biggest differences between China and the United States, as it relates to their approach, is that the United States has a sizable Ethiopian and African diaspora community that lives here, that's very vibrant here. And so the United States takes that into consideration as well. Obviously, the Ethiopian American and the African diaspora community as a whole is very involved in what goes on in the continent. And they make their views known, obviously, to the United States decision makers, whether it's the presidency or the Congress, as opposed to China, which doesn't really have a sizable Ethiopian or African diaspora community. There's a lot of students, obviously, from the continent in China, and then also a lot of business people. But yeah, you're right. China does have a more hands-off approach to the internal matters of African countries and all countries for that matter. Chinese foreign policy is pretty consistent with their hands-off approach on domestic issues. But I do believe that the United States has an important role to play as a moral authority, as the superpower in the world, as a long-standing democracy. I think that there are a lot of lessons that the United States can share with other countries. And then, the reality as well is the United States is the largest foreign aid donor to Ethiopia. And obviously with that comes certain expectations, not only that the Ethiopian people have for that aid, but also because we're talking about U.S. tax dollars, that the American people have for how foreign assistance is used as well. That's an important consideration.
You talked of moral authority of the United States, and there are some who say the U.S. should be the last country to talk of moral authority.
One could make that argument, yeah. I think for me, the way I see it is that the United States is a continuously evolving country. Each generation has its fights, and certainly my generation of younger Americans, we have our fights as well in terms of civil rights, in terms of ensuring greater equity and inclusion for all Americans, particularly people of color, as I'm sure folks abroad follow in the news. There are often incidences of police brutality and other challenges that really do harm the American political and social fabric. There are a lot of threats to the American democracy, obviously, but I think what is most important about the United States is that it's a continuously evolving country. It's often said that the United States is more like a project than a country, in the sense that it has continuously created new and better iterations of itself. And I believe that in the years and decades to come, we're going to see more of that progress. But to your point, I do agree that the U.S. Position is not always the strongest.
So going back to the Ethiopia's Grand Dam, the way it's used, as a pawn for international relations in the Middle East, and also Trump's need to appear a peace broker before the elections, and that the Ethiopian government is being seen as a partner in this.
Yeah, I think that Ethiopians have very valid concerns over what their government is doing or is not doing. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is one of the few things, perhaps, that unites all Ethiopians. It is above partisan politics. It's above ethnic politics. It is really a national interest, and not just for Ethiopia either, but it's a symbol of what Africa can do. This is a self-financed dam. The Ethiopian people at home and abroad contributed $5 billion to create this project when the international community, at the behest of Egypt, refused to finance. And so when that had happened, obviously, a decade ago, Ethiopia's leaders turned inwards. And they mobilized the public and everybody, from the wealthiest Ethiopians to those on the streets, were contributors to the dam. So I think, obviously, it's an incredibly important project. It holds the aspirations of what a better Ethiopia would look like, not just with power generation, but also with a continuous flow of economic development, tourism. We've seen, for instance, other mega dams around the world, and certainly here in the United States, like the Hoover Dam, have served as tourist attractions as well. So there's certainly a case to be made of making the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam site as a tourist attraction for Africans, for Black people, and for all people. I think that the politicization of the dam in terms of President Trump and his need, as you said, to continue to appear as a deal maker is a grave threat to Ethiopia, and also a grave threat to the stability and the health of U.S.-Ethiopia relations. The way that he has approached this, by strong-arming Sudan, there are larger implications to this. Trump wants to get reelected, and he will do whatever it takes to get reelected. The United States has a very strong relationship, not just with Ethiopia, but with Egypt as well. And from what we know, it appears that the Egyptian president had reached out to President Trump a year ago, asking him to be involved and to take leadership in this. And that, again, the president had delegated this to his Treasury Secretary, who is not a diplomat, and who comes with his fair share of controversies at the domestic front, that he was delegated the portfolio and not the skilled experts and diplomats within the national security staff and within the State Department, is a huge problem. And again, that Ethiopia consented to these talks and participated in it shows a certain lack of judgment as well. And so I hope that Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan collectively can push back. The United States can be there as an observer. The United States can support the conversations, but these have to be African-led. They need to happen in the continent. And there are mechanisms for this already within the AU and also within IGAD that these countries should be using, and not relying on Brussels or Washington or London or Beijing for answers.
You talked of lack of judgment on the part of the authorities in Addis Ababa, but there are some who say that it is even more than that the interests of Ethiopia is being compromised and that it is sold out.
Yeah, I was concerned, especially over the last year and a half, of greater involvement from the World Bank and from the IMF in what's going on in Ethiopia. These are institutions that historically have not had a good track record in developing countries, particularly in the African continent. There's an argument to be made that the IMF and the World Bank are reforming themselves and are trying to see developing countries more as partners. But as has been the case before, and certainly could be argued now, these institutions have largely been an extension of the United States and Europe to be able to influence the internal affairs of other countries. And again, under Trump, the United States has seen a significant decrease in its international standing, and its global leadership has been challenged primarily by Russia and by China, and Trump has allowed the United States to sort of recede based on his doctrine of America First. And so I'm concerned that money is being used to strong-arm Ethiopia, and it is my hope that Ethiopia would stand up and say, this is more than money, this is a national interest, this is a unifying force for all Ethiopians, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of their location, not only at home, but also those of us abroad. Not to mention, again, the dam was financed by the Ethiopian people. And so I think at the end of the day, the Ethiopian people should be the ultimate decision makers for whatever happens to the dam, and not any sort of perceived or real external determinants.
So what can the Ethiopian diaspora in the US, particularly people like you who have influence in America's political circles, do to help rectify this wrong approach in the negotiations over the Grand Ethiopian Dam?
The Ethiopian diaspora in the United States is incredibly diverse and vibrant. It includes entrepreneurs, it includes elected officials, it includes scientists and doctors, it includes engineers, it includes small business owners, and so many other people who are contributing to the social, economic, and political fabric of the United States. And certainly when it comes to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the Ethiopian diaspora community here in the United States has been extremely vocal in its support of the dam. We're seeing near unanimous support for the dam here, which is really encouraging. Obviously, it goes without saying, but there are a lot of challenges to Ethiopia's democratization, and also challenges to the sort of harmony of Ethiopians globally. The Ethiopian diaspora community has been very active with their dollars and with their votes to support Joe Biden. People have been very alarmed by Trump's remarks, especially because the Ethiopian community in the United States really does contribute in enormous ways to American life. And they saw it as a slight, and we saw it, all of us saw it as a slight to us as Americans of Ethiopian origin. So it is my hope that Ethiopian Americans can continue to be politically engaged. We see other diaspora communities in the United States, whether it is the Israelis or the Chinese or the Greek, the Mexicans and other communities, the Irish, who have very strong diasporas. My position has always been to successive Ethiopian governments. It has always been to stop seeing the diaspora just as a source of remittances, but really as a partner to the growth and development of Ethiopia. There's a lot of social, intellectual, and financial capital that we can tap on from the diaspora. And certainly as the diaspora grows in its political muscle as American citizens, Ethiopia should be leveraging that as well. We see other countries do this really well. On the African front, Cape Verde, for instance, in West Africa, has a very strong diaspora in the United States, including in my home state of Massachusetts. And we see very strong partnerships between the Cape Verdean business and political community in the United States and with their native homeland. So I hope to see over the next few years a greater partnership, because diasporas do leverage their power, and they can continue to do it for the betterment of relations between the United States and their homeland. And certainly, the Ethiopian diaspora over the years has been vocal about a variety of issues on the Ethiopian front, and I'm glad to see that leaders in the diaspora community have been mobilizing over the last several days to get members of Congress to speak out against Donald Trump and to get former diplomats and other leaders to also step up and say that what President Trump is doing to Ethiopia is just unacceptable.
Tigray is facing a lot of pressure from the authorities in Addis Ababa after the expiry of the term of Abiy Ahmed and his group. There's a lot of discrimination and lack of support from the center on the fight against COVID-19, on the fight against desert locusts, on budget and other issues. So what can the Tagaru diaspora and also Ethiopian diaspora in general in the US and elsewhere, how can they put leverage to address this crisis?
What we're seeing with regards to locusts in Ethiopia and the East Africa region is really heartbreaking. It's the worst locust outbreak for the last years. People are comparing it to sort of biblical experiences of locust swarms, and that really does break my heart. So I do want to take a moment to just realize that a lot of folks who were already hanging on the margins have lost their livelihoods. Ethiopia is a very agrarian country. 65% of the economy, obviously, is agriculture, but 85% of Ethiopians are rural. And so what happens with the economy, what happens with the agriculture does matter. It is an interest to everybody. And I'm really inspired by the Tagaru diaspora for raising close to $1 million through GoFundMe and other ways, and that they've been channeling support to non-government organizations in Tigray, including the Tigray Development Association and the Relief Society of Tigray. That's inspiring. That's remarkable. I hope to see greater peace and stability in Ethiopia. What is going on right now, the mutual non-recognition between the federal government and the Tigray regional government there are many things to say about this, but with regards to locusts and other emerging threats in Tigray and throughout Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa, it's really a distraction. I wish that we could focus attention, time, energy on critical issues like locusts, clean water, electricity, quality of education, the large-scale unemployment, particularly of young people throughout Ethiopia. There are a lot of critical issues that Ethiopia faces that, if left unresolved, are going to lead to further crises for the country in the short and long term. And so I really hope political leadership in Mekelle and in Addis Ababa can really negotiate for the sake of the country. And I understand, obviously, that the crises in Ethiopia, it's more than just Tigray. We're seeing a lot of violence throughout the country in Oromia and Amhara and Benishangul Gumuz. We're seeing violence in Walaita and the Gebru state. We're seeing violence in the Somali region, violence in the outskirts of Addis Ababa. Losing human life is a tragedy, and Ethiopia really needs to get a stronger hold of its internal situation. The intra-Ethiopia conflicts have resulted in millions of people who have been internally displaced. And right now the figures are around a little north of 1 million people are internally displaced within Ethiopia. It's a shame. It's a sad thing to be a refugee within your own country. That's a tragedy. And I really hope that Ethiopia's leaders can focus on these issues precisely because the country has long held its ambitions to become a middle-income country by 2025. Obviously, COVID-19 has impacted the economic development not only of Ethiopia, but the entire world is suffering economically because of this pandemic. And so I really do hope that the political situation can be resolved, that there can be inclusive governance and dialogue among political leaders throughout Ethiopia, Getting folks to the negotiating table is going to be hard. I have no illusions. But part of negotiation tactics includes bargaining, and part of it includes compromise. It's going to be important for Ethiopian political leaders throughout the country to come up with a win-win solution, and one that allows everyone to save face and move forward. We're going to have folks set their egos aside and understand that the people of Ethiopia, and certainly within Tigray in particular, are the ones who are going to get shortchanged at the end. What we're seeing right now with the locust swarms is going to impact and devastate the economy of Tigray and also other regions like Afar, Amhara, and other regions that have been impacted by locusts. And that's just not a sustainable way to move forward. Ethiopia already has about 30 million people who are living below the poverty line. Food insecurity is an issue. These are issues that need to be tackled with a whole of government approach. And certainly Friends of Ethiopia, the international community, needs to take a stronger role in these crises, particularly when it comes to locusts, because this is really becoming a matter of life and death. I hope that the leaders at the federal level and also at the regional level can set aside politics to really address this issue collaboratively. A breakdown of communication between Mekelle and Addis Ababa does not benefit anyone. It does not benefit the ordinary people. It does not benefit the farmer. And my hope is that these leaders can work collaboratively, because at the end of the day, we are talking about Ethiopians, regardless of where they are in the country. We're talking about Ethiopian people who are suffering due to locusts, who are suffering due to increased polarization, ethnic violence, and this is just unacceptable. We should not tolerate the loss of a single life or the loss of property, no matter where it is. So my hope is for the Ethiopian diaspora to continue to be involved in the growth and development of Ethiopia, certainly through fundraising. Charitable activities are wonderful. We're also seeing more investments from Ethiopians abroad, which is really important. Ways to create jobs, right? Ethiopia's 110 million population, over half of them are under the age of 30. And there's a chronic unemployment problem in Ethiopia, particularly among young people. And we have seen this in the past, not only in Ethiopia, but Africa and throughout the world. The restlessness and the disenfranchisement and the disillusionment of young people can result in violence. It has happened before in Ethiopia. We've seen a lot of student demonstrations at university campuses. We've seen riots throughout the decades, and this is something that needs to be prevented. So my hope is to see an inclusive whole of government approach that involves political parties, that involves all other stakeholders to Ethiopia's future, including faith leaders. Obviously, Ethiopia is an enormously religious country, so involving clergy leaders from all the different faiths is going to be important. Academic leaders, civil society, etc. Really making this an inclusive effort is going to be important. And the diaspora obviously has a role to play in that. And they continue to do so. Ethiopians in the diaspora have been working with members of Congress over the last several months, but also over the last several decades to ensure that democracy, good governance, rule of law, peace and stability are all part of the U.S. foreign policy towards Ethiopia.
The Ethiopian diaspora in the U.S. and elsewhere is a reflection of the internal situation here. There's a lot of polarization internally here in Ethiopia among various stakeholders, particularly among the politicians. And the Ethiopian diaspora in the US and elsewhere is even more polarized, more divided. What needs to happen for the Ethiopian diaspora to achieve a higher moral ground to influence what's happening back at home?
My generation, those of us who are in our 20s, our 30s, and younger, have not been scarred by war. We have not seen some of the challenges of previous generations. And my hope is that we come with less baggage and more open-mindedness. We really have to learn how to celebrate the ways in which we differ. difference is not a problem. Whether it is your identity, your political persuasion, these are things that we can work with, right? Ethiopia's problems are political. They can be solved. We're not talking about rocket science here. And it's, I think, really important that we see ourselves as forward-looking. You can continue to relitigate Ethiopian history. There are many things that we can discuss and debate about modern or medieval Ethiopian history, events that may or may not have actually shaped the current trajectory of Ethiopia, but that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, Ethiopia is a country of 110 million people, and folks are looking for solutions. And certainly in the diaspora, the diaspora community has a role to play in Ethiopia's growth and development, but also the diaspora community has a role to play in its adopted homeland too. With Ethiopians, particularly in the United States, as residents and citizens of this country, of the United States, we have a role to play as Americans in the political, economic, and social fabric of this country, as voters, as business people, as students, as entrepreneurs, etc. And so my hope is that Ethiopians can be more forward-looking. At one point or another, everyone in Ethiopian history was an oppressor, and everyone was oppressed. We can discuss and debate Ethiopian history until the sun sets, but it's not going to help the ordinary Ethiopian. By and large, Ethiopians are rural. They are disconnected from urban areas. They are disconnected from the face of power. And the priority needs to be making sure that these people have power, that they have water, that they have jobs and stability and income and educational opportunities and opportunities for upward social mobility. And relitigating Ethiopia's past does not really help that process. But I also do encourage, and I'm glad to see political debate and discussion going on in Ethiopia and in the diaspora. I think it's great that people have strong opinions about the future of Ethiopia, and that they share it in a peaceful way is a good thing. Democracy at the end of the day is a marketplace of ideas, and it's important to have strong and fierce debates over the future of Ethiopia, but to do it in a way that recognizes the humanity in each other is really important. And so I think sometimes we lose sight of that. We like to draw lines in the sand very quickly, and we like to otherize people. We turn it into an us versus them situation, when in reality, as Ethiopians, the country is going to either sink or swim together. And the sooner that political leaders in the homeland and also in the diaspora understand that, the better. Because what we're seeing right now in Ethiopia in terms of intra-Ethiopia violence and the possible spillover effect to the Horn of Africa region, that does not benefit anyone. And again, it is a distraction towards the pressing issues of the day, including the locust swarms and other critical issues. So my hope is that Ethiopians, especially those of us in the diaspora, can embrace our shared identity, our multicultural, multi-ethnic identity, and use our diversity as a strength. In the United States, we like to talk often about diversity, and there are a lot of different slogans that we use: "United we stand," or "Out of many one," etc. The lesson here that I think can be learned is that adding diversity and being inclusive about the ways in which we seek solutions only is going to help the future. I still choose to remain optimistic about Ethiopia's future. I think Ethiopia's brightest days are yet to come. But I also think that there are some pretty serious threats to Ethiopia. And if we as Ethiopians abroad and at home do not get our act together and realize that, then it's going to end up becoming a real problem for the country.
You said earlier that you hoped, if Biden is elected, that Ethio-US relations will see their brighter day. The US foreign policy, regardless of who is in power, whether it's Republican or Democratic, does not show significant changes. What guarantee do we have that US foreign policy will change under Biden particularly regarding the Grand Renaissance Dam?
I think the approach needs to be win-win, and we can't look at it in terms of zero-sum. These negotiations are obviously highly sensitive. Indeed, Egypt is a very important ally to the United States, particularly in the Middle East, and particularly with Egypt's relations with Israel, and Israel obviously being one of the top allies for the United States. I mean, it's all interconnected, and I agree with you there. But at the same time, Ethiopia is also a strategic ally to the United States, not just in the Horn of Africa either, but as the seat of the African Union, one of the largest embassies one of the largest U.S. embassies in Africa is in Ethiopia. It is a nerve center for a lot of American diplomacy in the continent, and obviously the United States has 2 ambassadors in Ethiopia, one accredited to Ethiopia and the other to the African Union. And the United States has placed a strong importance on Ethiopia for decades. This is not new, right? The diplomatic and economic relations between the United States and Ethiopia are nearing 120 years now. My hope is that under a Biden administration, although the substance of American foreign policy will largely remain the same, which is true across administrations, U.S. foreign policy, the substance of it is usually consistent. But in diplomacy and in negotiations, often the approach that you take is equally important to the substance of your arguments and the substance of your positions. And I think that Trump's approach has alienated the world community. There will obviously be certain substantive changes to U.S. policy with regards to climate change and refugee acceptance policies and whatnot. But in particular to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, my hope is that under a Biden administration, and I'm fairly confident about this, that under a Biden administration, the United States will take a step back and really let the African Union lead on peace negotiations, recognizing, again, that Egypt has a real need for the Nile's waters. The Nile River has historically, over the centuries, been a lifeline to Egypt, but at the same time recognizing that 85% waters flow from Ethiopia, and that Ethiopia, just as much as Egypt, has an argument, if not more, to utilize the Nile's waters. And again, emphasizing that the Ethiopian position has always been never to limit the flow of water to Egypt. Under various governments, whether it has been under Haile Selassie, under Meles Zenawi, or even the current position, it has never been to limit the water flow. And so it's important to reassure Egypt that, and it's important that the Ethiopian position remains consistent as well. But I think that a Biden administration is going to approach this with more sensitivity, with more nuance. It's concerning that we have not seen a U.S. delegation yet be sent to Ethiopia. I think it is imperative that at least at the very minimum, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs should get on an airplane today and go to Ethiopia and really work on smoothing these relations. Not since the Derg have relations between the United States and Ethiopia been this bad. In the 1980s, it got to the point where the United States and Ethiopia recalled their ambassadors. Both countries were operating their embassies on a skeleton crew. And not since then have we seen such a deterioration in U.S.-Ethiopia relations. And I think that it's really important to understand the gravity of the situation. And again, under a Biden administration, because we know a lot of the people that are advising him right now, and these are career diplomats. These are experts on Africa. They're experts on transboundary water issues, etc. And we also know that Vice President Biden listens to his advisors, and he listens to facts, and he listens to science, and that he reads policy papers. And so I believe that Vice President Biden is going to take a different approach if elected president. And again, the approach is as important as the substance of the conversation. And Donald Trump has done a great job alienating U.S. allies, not just in Africa, obviously, calling the continent S-hole countries, but also some of America's most important European allies, including France and the UK and Germany as well. So my hope is that we'll see substantial changes in the approach, if not the substance. But this again speaks to why Ethiopian Americans need to be more involved in American civic life, because we do know that diaspora communities can and have shaped U.S. foreign policy on their homeland. And it's important that the United States government sees the African diaspora and the Ethiopian diaspora in particular as a partner. And the last thing I'll say is the Biden-Harris campaign several weeks ago released a policy on the African diaspora. They have been working closely with members of the African diaspora throughout these past few months to craft a Biden-Harris policy on the African diaspora and on Africa. They see the African diaspora as a constituency that needs to be heard and recognized, and more importantly, a constituency that needs to have a seat at the table. Under the Obama administration, the White House held numerous briefings for diaspora communities, including the first ever Ethiopian diaspora briefing at the White House. And it was a wonderful opportunity to showcase U.S.-Ethiopia relations, but also the growing influence and engagement of the Ethiopian diaspora community across business and civic engagement, etc. And my hope is that the Biden administration would do the same in terms of engaging diaspora communities. I know that we will have a seat at the table as Ethiopians, as Africans, and more importantly, as Black people. I know that we will have a seat at the table in a Biden administration. We have not had one under Trump, and I believe that if we did, and if we had a seat at the table advising Trump on Africa and advising him on Ethiopia, we would not have seen the blunder that we did see in terms of him contemplating publicly an Egyptian bombing on Ethiopia's dam.
So the forum you told me now during the Obama administration, the first ever Ethiopian session, was it the last one as well?
Yeah. Yes. Donald Trump has not made efforts to engage the diaspora community, but the Obama administration, as I said, President Obama had numerous Ethiopians working for him, not just in the White House, but in the United States federal administration. There were some really awesome people. Johannes Abraham, for instance, was chief of staff to Valerie Jarrett, President Obama's senior advisor and head of intergovernmental affairs and public engagement. We have other folks like Daniel Yohannes, who served as the United States ambassador to the OECD, people like Mimi Alamayo, who served as the executive vice president for the United States Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is the development finance arm of the United States government, and before that had served under President George W. Bush as the top U.S. Treasury Department official for Africa, as the United States Executive Director for the African Development Bank. These are just three of several Ethiopians that worked for President Obama. And so we saw under his leadership a desire to engage African diaspora communities. And certainly, President Obama became the first sitting United States president to visit Ethiopia and the African Union. That was a momentous occasion for all of us. It was really a point of pride for me to see photos and videos of the flags of Ethiopia and the United States hoisted together at the National Palace in Addis Ababa. A lot of us saw that and were extremely proud of it because it really was the merging of our two favorite countries, the United States and Ethiopia, and to see Obama as a son of an African go to the continent and embrace Ethiopia and the AU as an important ally to the United States was great. And so I hope that a Biden presidency would have a similar approach to Ethiopia. I hope that we will see Ethiopians working in the White House and in the Biden administration, and that we will see, hopefully, President Biden visit Ethiopia and visit the African Union. He is no stranger to Ethiopian issues, and it would be great to see him as president visit the continent and really repair a lot of the damage that Trump has done.
With this cheerful note and a brighter perspective for the future, I end the interview here. Samuel Gebru, thank you very much for taking the time to give us this very informative and elaborate interview.
Thank you so much, Mekelle.
Well, we have come to the end of the interview. Thanks for watching, and this is goodbye from me. Distracted from the uninteresting times of peace, tranquility, and development.
The interesting ones and hard times have arrived. Of detraction and relapse, but also of mobilization and readiness, of sacrifices and victories, of hopes and great strides.
With ripple effects going far.